Welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In continuation with the series on sociological research method, in today's lecture we are going to discuss a research method or a technique for data collection which is known as ethnography. Now we need to discuss ethnography as a method of qualitative data collection, and this is important because there is a lot of debate between the significance or importance of data, especially when we understand the conflict between quantitative data and qualitative data. In the previous lecture, we discussed about the type of data collection, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, depends on the nature of research that is being conducted. Today, we are going to refer to John Brewer's book, Ethnography, where he kind of defends ethnography as a method for data collection, especially when there is a lot of critique towards attaining objectivity. So, begin with, let us understand or define ethnography. Ethnography is defined as the study of people in naturally occurring settings, which is generally known in research as the field, using methods like participant observations and interview to capture the social meaning and ordinary activities. In this lecture, we will specifically refer to John Brewer, where in his book Ethnography, he explains that ethnography is characterized by interpolation of method and methodology. Ethnography is both a set of technique and a philosophical orientation, often rooted in naturalism or the interpretative paradigm, focused on intimate familiarity with the social world. So, on one side you have the quantitative method, which is more in terms of collecting quantifiable numbers, data, which would be kind of reflect more objective. And on the other side, the effort is to understand the nuances of everyday life, the meanings, the emotions, and other kind of action which is part of the individuals that is being subject to studied. Now, when we look into ethnography, let us understand some of the core characteristics. Number one is the naturalistic setting. Research is conducted in the everyday environment where the social life of the group naturally occurs, which, as I've said already, is referred to as the field, not in a laboratory or an artificial setting. So, there is no kind of a lab or a technique where we are dealing. As a researcher, we are part of the society where the action is being conducted, and therefore this field is a natural setting. The second characteristic of ethnography is participant observation. The researcher is not detached observer but actively participates in the daily life and activities of the people being studied to gain an insider view. Now, the researcher generally becomes one among the others. He or she becomes an insider. So, in later parts of this lectures, we will discuss how it is problematic to not become an insider and collect data. So, when we refer to participant observation as a method of data collection, implies that the researcher is part of the same society that he or she is studying. The third core characteristic of ethnography is holistic perspective. Ethnography aims to understand the entire culture, social structure and context of the group, not just a single variable or behavior. So, the entire cultural background is the field where every element, you cannot segregate that you are just studying the marriage or you are just studying the economic part or you are just studying the political part. So, the entire culture of the community is being studied. The fourth characteristic is the inductive or emic approach. The goal is to understand the world through the eyes of the people being studied, and that is the meaning of ethnography. Ethnic means the insider, viewpoint of the insider, allowing themes and theories to emerge from the data rather than testing pre-existing hypotheses, which is generally done in a quantitative approach. So, here ethnography is emic, whereas when we kind of depend on an external source of data validation, then it is kind of an etic view. The next characteristic is the longitudinal research. Studies often require a sustained period of fieldwork to observe natural cycle, build trust, and ensure the data reflects genuine behavior rather than the performance for researcher. So, we have understood the entire core characteristics of ethnography, and as we began to define ethnology, we said that it is both a method and methodology. Let us understand the ethnography as method and methodology. Ethnography is a research style that requires methods permitting access to people's social meaning and activities through closer association and familiarity with these settings. It emphasizes the specific techniques used and the underlying philosophical framework. Ethnography utilizes a triangulation of multiple methods to collect data, which are employed not in isolation but together to meet the style objective of exploring social meaning through close field involvement. So, there are a number of methods or a multiple of methods which are used in collecting ethnographic data. The first, as we already discussed, is the participant observation, and this is the signature method involving the researcher's direct involvement in the setting, becoming an insider in the community. The second method is in-depth interview. The in-depth interview enables the researcher to capture individual perspective and deeper meaning. So, many a time we cannot kind of understand the real meaning through observation. So, we need to kind of have more discussions to kind of go deeper into the action which is being observed, and here the in-depth interview becomes important. The third is discourse analysis. Discourse analysis is used to study how language is used in the social setting. Fourth method is personal documents. Personal diary or the research diary is an important part of ethnographic research. As an insider, when a researcher is observing, it's very important to kind of maintain a research diary where the researcher notes the minute details of his or her everyday visiting the field or even interacting and doing interviews. And the fifth method is visual method, where now in kind of lot of use of videos, photography and films are used to kind of enrich the data which is collected. Next, we try to understand the philosophical framework, and the first is naturalism. Ethnography is not just a collection of method, it is associated with a specific philosophical framework or methodology that validates its practice. Naturalism is also known by the other names like humanistic, hermeneutics or interpretative paradigm. It is concerned with the study of social life and natural settings as it occurs independently of experimental manipulation. The primary goal of the social science is to understand people's action and the experiences of the world. The understanding of people's motivated action arises from and reflects back on the experiences. Knowledge is acquired through intimate familiarity with the social world and by capturing the voice of the people who inhabit it, and that is what we discussed earlier as the emic perspective, emerging from within the field. It's not something which is external but is internal. Through the observation, through the interaction, the data is constructed. Ethnography, with its emphasis on close association and capturing internal social meaning, is uniquely equipped to achieve the central aims of naturalistic paradigm. Now, when we look into the ethnography, where we have defined it, understood the core characteristic and also its philosophical orientation, here in John Brewer tries to give make more specific understanding of use of ethnography in work organization. So, it is kind of used in several other fields, but here we are going to understand how ethnography is kind of used in organizational or it can be called as ethnography of work in organization. And it is a central part of the emerging sociology of work, industrial sociology, where the effort is to kind of look into the everyday experience of the workplace, and that therefore in this work Brewer kind of tells us that there are three main categories. Number one, ethnographic research focusing on work in organization, which is kind of dealing with occupational career and identity as mechanism of organizational maintenance. In these research, the focus on how the roles, perspective and identities of workers contribute to the stability of reproduction of the organization or social institution. The second type of research in ethnography in organization is basically focusing on managerial control in organization. This category explores the method and practices used by management to organize, supervise and control the behavior and output of employees. And the third is practical reasoning in bureaucratic and formal organization setting. This investigates how employee makes sense and navigate the formal rules, procedures and structure, which is kind of when we look into these characteristics, it defines bureaucracy as a modern form of organization. And it's important to understand the practical reasoning of how actually people in a bureaucratic organization work. Do they follow the rules and the procedures laid down, or they are certain everyday mechanism to make work more efficient and achieve your targets. So, this tripartite ordering emphasized both how institutions reproduce themselves and how everyday work practices sustain or modify formal structure. Here, when we look into the method of ethnography, John Brewer kind of gives the credit to the emergence of ethnography in work organization to the Chicago School. So, the initial focus on work within organization was established by the Chicago School in Sociology. Early Chicago School sociologists used ethnography to show how social life and institution reproduce themselves over time, often by following workers' careers and identity within specific organizational setting. Their concern with work stemmed from an interest in demonstrating how particular institutions such as urban workplace maintained continuity through everyday practices and trajectories of workers. And when we look into these studies which kind of give us a natural histories of occupation, so within the Chicago School of Sociology, researchers developed natural histories of occupation, frequently focusing on marginal or unusual job in the urban industrial context. These studies sought to capture workers' lived experience and to show how occupational culture on the margin nonetheless contribute to the stability of broader social institutions. The sociologist Everett Hughes coined the term dirty work to describe this specific focus on occupation that deal with things society consider unpleasant, morally dubious or physically distasteful, yet are necessary for the maintenance of society. For example, people those who are kind of involved in cleaning, scavenging or kind of even any kind of work which is important. So, if there are no kind of sweepers or there are no cleaners, then the urban space would be kept dirty. So, these were termed as dirty work. Now, there are a lot of examples of occupations studied ethnography, that is the sociologist who studied workplace organizational setting using the ethnography as a method for data collection. And here is a list which provides the wide range of roles that have been the subject of this type of deep observational research. Law enforcement or studies of the prison, police officers, prisoners, wardens. The second category would be the service or the sex workers, nightclub, hostesses, massage parlor training. So, a lot of ethnography studies have been done of these work organization. The third is industrial transport, where trained locomotive repair, lorry drivers, assembly line workers, machine operators have been studied. Now, these studies reveal how occupational identities and informal practices underpin both organizational control and the ongoing maintenance of social norms. The second category of organization ethnography is the managerial control within organization. This tradition investigates the interplay between formal organization and informal social organization in the workplace. Earlier ethnography of work often treated the organization as background, concentrating on the culture of particular job or occupation. In contrast, the work highlighted here puts organizational control at the center, examining how structures, rules, and power relations shape everyday work experience. And the example of these, the organizational structure or the management is the Hawthorne study and human relation. So, the tradition of focusing on control was established by the well known Hawthorne study at Western Electrics in the 1920s. This study showed that workers' performance depended heavily on social relations and group norms, not just physical conditions or pay. The Hawthorne study tradition focused on control was their finding underpinned human relations theory and foregrounded the existence of an informal organization whose norms regulate peace, cooperation, and job satisfaction alongside formal hierarchy. So, these studies kind of pointed out that for more efficient production, it is important to have an informal organization and not always follow or not be very strict with rules and management control. So, ethnographic research on informal organization and bureaucracy had a significant impact on sociological understanding. Number one, it provided a revised understanding of bureaucracy, showing the formal rules are often interpreted, bypassed, or modified by informal practices in everyday life. The second contribution was it sensitized researchers to the role of informal social organization in coping with various work challenges. Number one example of how the informal structures help to cope with the stress at workplace was coping with boredom, which was a study done by Roy, published in 1960. Problems of coercive control, studied by Bureau, published in 1979. And the dynamics of work resistance, published by Benon, 1975. Now, when we look into ethnography, we look into the third category of research where it is kind of tilted towards a neo-Marxist direction. Some of the ethnographic work later took a neo-Marxist direction, focusing on power dynamics and the organization of labor under capitalism. And one of the concepts that emerges from ethnography of work organization was the concept of de-skilling given by Braverman in 1974. His study focused on how the application of scientific management and technology leads to the de-skilling of labor force to increase managerial control. In order to understand these concepts of de-skilling and alienation at workplace, it is good to refer to the series on sociology of work where the Braverman's article has been discussed. Another example of the neo-Marxist direction is the concept of dead-end work. Willis published a work in 1977, the ethnography explored how class background and cultural dynamics reproduce social inequalities in the experience of dead-end work. The third stream of workplace ethnography that studies how people at low levels of bureaucracy use practical reasoning, formal rules, and tacit knowledge to accomplish organizational work. Ethnography, influenced by ethnomethodology, examine how workers interpret and deploy formal rules in situated ways to achieve organizational objective. Classic study by Bittner and Weeder analyze how frontline actors such as police or residents in carceral setting invoke official rules and codes in their everyday accounts and action, thus revealing rule use as a practical accomplishment rather than mechanical compliance. A number of studies focus on professional and semi-professional, including doctors, nurses, and psychotherapists, to show the seemingly complex expert work is organized through ordinary situated reasoning. These work demonstrate that professional practice depends on members' common sense methods for categorizing cases, making judgments, and coordinating with others rather than an abstract formal procedures alone. Other ethnography in this category focused on routine jobs to reveal the complexity hidden within them. These studies alerted researchers to the tacit knowledge. Tacit knowledge implies unspoken practical know-how that workers possess, which is necessary to accomplish the pressure of work at the bottom of the bureaucracy. They demonstrated the hidden operation of discretion. And what is discretion? Discretion is the freedom to decide or act according to one's own judgment. Second is that they have decision making, that is required for routine tasks, and the complexity of knowledge required for jobs often viewed as simple or unskilled. Many times when we visit a workplace, we see that though those who are at the lower level kind of maybe having less of technical knowledge, but their everyday experience of handling the machines and their workplace gives them that edge that they can use certain tacit knowledge, or they can use their discretion to give a solution to many of the problems arising at the workplace. So, these three strands of ethnographic research led qualitative sociologists to reconceptualization of the organization itself. Ethnographic research allows qualitative sociologists to view the organizations, especially the bureaucratic structure, not merely as a rigid system within occasional dysfunction, but as a dynamic and negotiated entity. Ethnographic studies of work suggest that organizations do not exist as fixed, purely formal entities, but as social institutions enacted and reproduced through everyday practices. So, the organization basically is a symbolic social institutions, and you know what, it is symbolic of the workplace for the worker who is working at that place, and that this could be a completely different understanding of how that organization has been described technically. So, here what appears as the organization in stabilized outcome of how people collectively interpret rules, and every organization can be having a same set of rules, but the interpretation depends on will vary because it depends on their own experience with this with their co-workers, with the machines, with the rules. So, the rules are interpreted contextually according to each workplace knowledge, and therefore, this organization could be defined as coordinated action and sustain a sense of order, shared sense of order. So, the key insight is that organizations are symbolic social institutions entirely rooted in the people's practice for reproducing them. This means the organization is not a self-sustaining machine, but exists only through the continuous day-to-day action and interpretation of its member. Then when we talk about work organization and how ethnography has been used as a method for studying these workplace norms and relations, what comes out is that there is a recursive relationship. The recursive relationship between the formal and the informal structure. So, the organizational formal character is seen as the result of the ad hoc negotiation process and the practical reasoning of its worker. The rules don't just exist, they are constantly being made real and sometimes by people's action. Because people are kind of changing them or bending them to suit their everyday functioning of the workplace. Because organization exercise coercive control through formal procedures and documentation, workers must make their informal problem solving appear as if it followed the rules. So, what is the ethnography's methodological contribution? When we look into the ways in which rules are kind of negotiated, it leads to the generation of additional ad hoc practices such as papering work, retrofitting accounts, or adjusting records so that the documentary trail matches official expectations. This reconceptualization relies on ethnographic distinct focus on naturally occurring activities, members' meaning and participants' own account within the real organization. By attending closely to workers' language and practical reasoning in situ, ethnographic method reveal how the lived, informal work of members continually reproduce the organizational formal appearance. Now, when we have looked into the merits of or the contribution of ethnography as a methodology, we need to also look at the other side where there are certain problematic nature of ethnography. Ethnography is characterized by the blending of its research method, fieldwork, participant observation and its underlying philosophy, that is the methodology, which in itself has created problems. And there are two extremes. One is the naturalism defense. Within the philosophical tradition of naturalism, ethnography was privileged as the main method and its weaknesses were often overlooked. And the second extreme is anti-naturalism, where the critiques of naturalism as a theory of knowledge tended to reject ethnography more or less out of hand. Natural science critique, exemplified by Goldthorpe, argue that ethnography fails scientific canon by making the researcher a variable that influences the field through presence of participation. Unlike controlled experiments where observers are detached, ethnography embraces immersion, sometimes incorporating the researcher's own experience and attitude shift, what Adler termed auto-observation as legitimate data. Ethnography's flexible, open-ended method appear unsystematic, introducing extraneous variation that obscure the actual data or the true nature of the data. So, these are some of the problematic nature of the ethnography, but John Brewer kind of argues in terms of giving us a double edge in terms of providing both legitimation and representation, which enables ethnography as a method to collect authentic and capture the life of into the community that is being studied in sense of capturing the everyday meaning of their activity. So, with this we have tried to define ethnography, understand the core characteristic, understood ethnography as both method and methodology, looked into the way in which it was influenced by the Chicago School of Sociology to understand organizations where there have been a lot of ethnography to study the management control, the bureaucracy, the contribution of the marginal or the lower side. And with this, we have a holistic understanding of ethnography as a research method. For reference, it is important to read Brewer John D. book Ethnography, published in 2010, published by Rawat Publication. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.